The sun had already set behind the tall buildings of the city, and the long corridors of the music conservatory were almost empty. The shining floors still carried the faint echo of piano keys and violin strings that had filled the rooms all day. The students had gone home laughing and chatting as they left, their expensive instruments on their backs and confidence in their steps. At the far end of the hallway, a small figure moved slowly, pushing a cleaning cart. Her name was Maria Alvarez, a woman in her early 50s with tired eyes and gentle hands. She wore a faded blue uniform and old shoes that made soft sounds on the marble floor. Every night she cleaned the classrooms, the studios, and the concert hall. She worked quietly, humming under her breath, never disturbing anyone. No one really noticed her. To most students, she was just the cleaning lady. They passed her every day without even a glance. Some even left their trash behind, knowing she would pick it up. But Maria never complained. She had learned long ago that dignity doesn't depend on what others see. It depends on what you know about yourself. Every evening, when she entered the concert hall to mop the floor, she would stop for a few seconds and look at the grand piano standing in the center of the stage. The black wood shone under the soft yellow lights. Sometimes she felt her fingers itching, wanting to touch the keys, to press them just once to hear that familiar sound again. But she never did, not here. Not now. One night, a group of students stayed behind after practice. They were from one of the top piano classes, confident, competitive, and a bit arrogant. They were trying to master a difficult piece by Chopin, but it wasn't going well. One of them hit the wrong note and groaned. "This piece is impossible," one said, slamming the keys. "Maybe we're overthinking it," another laughed. "Or maybe we need a miracle." They noticed Maria mopping near the stage steps. One of them, a tall boy with restless energy, grinned. "Hey, why don't we let her try?" he said jokingly. "Maybe she can play better than us." The others laughed. "Yeah, let's see what the cleaning lady can do." Maria looked up, startled. No, I'm just cleaning," she said softly. "Oh, come on." The tall boy insisted, standing up. "Don't be shy. Just one note. Let's hear it." The others joined in, clapping and teasing. "Play something for us, ma'am." "Just one song." Maria's hands froze on the mop handle. She didn't know what to say. It had been years since she had even touched a piano. Years since she had let herself remember what it felt like to play. I can't," she said quietly. "Of course you can't," one of the girls said, rolling her eyes. "She probably doesn't even know what a piano scale is." The laughter stung. Maria lowered her eyes and continued mopping. But the tall boy wasn't done. He walked up to the piano, patted the seat, and smiled. "Come on, just one note. It'll make our night." Something in his voice wasn't cruel, just childish, thoughtless. Maria hesitated, then sighed. Maybe if she played one note, they'd stop and let her work in peace. She placed the mop against the wall and slowly walked to the stage. The students laughed and whispered among themselves as she sat down. Her hands trembled a little as she touched the smooth keys. It had been so long. The cold surface under her fingertips brought back 1,000 memories. Concert halls, applause, her husband's proud smile in the front row. She closed her eyes for a second, and everything around her faded. When she pressed the first key, the sound floated through the empty hall, soft, pure, and deep. It was just one note, but it carried something inside it, something that silenced the laughter immediately. She moved her fingers again, and this time a melody began to form. It wasn't Chopin or Beethoven. It was something else, something her heart remembered even though her mind had tried to forget. The notes grew stronger, more emotional. The sound filled every corner of the room. The students stopped talking. One of them stepped closer, staring in disbelief. The woman who they thought was just a cleaner was playing like someone who had spent her whole life with music. Her hands moved gracefully, her eyes half closed, lost in the rhythm. Every note seemed to carry a story, of love, of loss, of years spent away from the piano but never truly letting go of it. When she finally lifted her fingers off the keys, the hall was silent. No one moved. The echo of the last note hung in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Maria looked up, suddenly aware of the students standing around her. She felt her heart racing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, standing up quickly. "I shouldn't have touched it." But no one laughed now. The tall boy spoke first, his voice soft. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Maria shook her head, embarrassed. "It was a long time ago," she said simply. She reached for her mop, trying to end the conversation. The girl who had mocked her earlier took a small step forward. That was beautiful, she said quietly. What song was that? Maria smiled faintly. Something I wrote many years ago, she said. Then she picked up her cleaning cloth and started wiping the piano lid gently, as if nothing had happened. The students didn't know what to do. They had just discovered that the woman they laughed at could play better than most of them. It was confusing, humbling. When Maria left the hall that night, the group stayed behind, still silent. Finally, one of them said, "Did you see her hands? The way she moved?" "Yeah," the tall boy replied, staring at the piano. "She played like..." She was telling a story. None of them practiced after that. They just sat there thinking. For the first time, they realized how little they understood about real music, the kind that comes not from skill alone, but from life. Maria walked home through the quiet streets, her shoes clicking softly on the pavement. She lived in a small apartment near the edge of the city, where the buildings were older and the lights dimmer. When she entered, she placed her bag on the table and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered below. She sighed deeply, her fingers still tingling from the music. She hadn't planned to play again. For years, she had buried that part of herself, believing it belonged to another lifetime. A lifetime before everything had changed. But tonight, something had stirred again. Something she thought she had lost forever. She made a cup of tea and sat quietly. The melody she played still echoed in her mind. She remembered the last time she had performed, before she left her home country, before the war took everything. Her husband used to tell her, "You were born for the piano. No matter what happens, never stop playing." But life had other plans. Survival had become more important than music. As the night grew deeper, Maria looked at her hands. The veins showed clearly under the skin, the fingers still graceful despite years of cleaning and hard work. She smiled sadly. Maybe, she whispered to herself, the music never really leaves. The next day, when she returned to the conservatory, something felt different. As she walked through the hallway with her mop and bucket, a few students nodded politely. One even smiled at her. She didn't understand why. She had no idea that word had already spread. By noon, everyone was talking about the cleaning lady who played like a concert pianist. Some thought it was a rumor, some thought it was a joke. But those who had seen it knew the truth. It was real. That evening, when Maria entered the concert hall again, the piano seemed to wait for her. She didn't touch it this time. She just stood there for a moment, looking at it from a distance, her eyes soft and thoughtful. She didn't know that this small moment, a few simple notes played by tired hands, was about to change everything. The next evening, the air inside the conservatory was different. The students were whispering in small groups, glancing toward the hallways as if expecting something unusual to happen. The story of the cleaning lady who played the piano had already spread across the campus like wildfire. Some didn't believe it, some laughed it off, and some were simply curious. Maria didn't know any of this. She came in as usual, wearing her blue uniform and carrying her cleaning cart. Her routine never changed. She greeted the guard with a polite smile, clocked in, and began sweeping the floors. To her, it was just another evening of work, but as she walked past the music room, she felt eyes on her. A few students turned their heads, whispering quietly. One of them even nodded respectfully, something that had never happened before. Maria felt a little uncomfortable. She didn't understand why they were looking at her like that. She thought maybe her uniform had a stain or her hair was messy. She quickly pushed her cart into the hallway, trying not to draw attention. Inside one of the practice rooms, the same group of students from the night before were gathered again. They hadn't stopped talking about what they saw. The memory of her playing had stayed with them. It wasn't just about skill. It was about the feeling behind every note. One of them said softly, "I couldn't sleep last night." That sound, it was like something from another world. The tall boy who had teased her the most shook his head slowly. "We laughed at her," he said, guilt in his voice. "And she still played for us." The others went quiet. None of them could forget how she had looked while playing. Her closed eyes, her trembling hands, and that deep moving melody that spoke more than words ever could. Later that night, Maria entered the concert hall again. The grand piano was there just like always. The soft lights made it shine beautifully. She started cleaning the stage, humming quietly to herself. But before long, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw 3 students standing by the door, the same ones from before. "Good evening," the tall boy said, his voice unusually polite. Maria stopped and smiled kindly. "Good evening. I'll be done here soon. You can come practice after that." The boy shook his head. "No, we're not here to practice. We wanted to say sorry." Maria blinked in surprise. "Sorry? For last night," he said. "We were rude. We didn't mean to make fun of you. We didn't know." She looked at them softly, her eyes warm but tired. "It's all right. People say things. It doesn't matter. But it does," said the girl beside him. "You played like someone who really knows what music means. It wasn't just notes. It was—" She stopped, searching for words. It was real. Maria felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I used to play long ago." The boy frowned. "Used to? Why did you stop?" Maria looked down at her hands, still rough from years of cleaning. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Because sometimes life takes away the things you love most. And when that happens, you just learn to live without them." The students didn't know what to say. Her words hit something inside them. Something beyond music, something about life itself. After a pause, the tall boy spoke again. "Can you play for us again?" Maria shook her head quickly. "Oh, no. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have touched the piano. It's not my place." "It is your place," the girl said. "You belong there more than we do." Maria smiled gently. "You're kind, but I have work to do." She picked up her mop again and began cleaning. The students stayed for a while, just watching her, before quietly leaving the hall. That night, when Maria finished her work, she sat on the stage steps for a few minutes before leaving. The hall was silent, empty, peaceful. She stared at the piano, her heart heavy with memories. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to feel that connection, that deep joy and sadness that came from music. She missed it, but she was afraid that touching it again would open old wounds that never fully healed. As she got up to leave, she didn't notice that someone had been standing quietly near the back. The music professor, Mr. Harold, a man known for his strictness and love of perfection. He had heard the story from students but didn't believe it. Now he had just seen her sitting there looking at the piano with eyes full of emotion. He decided he needed to know more. The next morning, when Maria arrived for work, Mr. Harold called her to his office. She was nervous, thinking maybe she had done something wrong. "Please sit," he said kindly. "Don't worry. You're not in trouble." She sat down slowly, hands folded in her lap. "I heard that you played the piano the other night," he said. "Is that true?" Maria looked down. "Just a little?" the students asked. "I didn't mean to cause any problem." "Problem?" he said with a small smile. "No, quite the opposite. Everyone's been talking about it. They say you played beautifully. I wanted to hear it myself." Maria shook her head quickly. "Oh, no, sir. I can't. I haven't practiced in years. I don't even know if I remember how to play properly." He studied her carefully. "You were a pianist once, weren't you?" Her hands tightened slightly. For a moment she thought about lying, but something in his eyes made her tell the truth. "Yes," she whispered. "A long time ago. Back home before—" She stopped, her voice trembling. "Before everything changed." Mr. Harold nodded slowly. "I understand. But talent like that never disappears. It waits." She said nothing. "Would you play something for me?" he asked gently. Maria's heart pounded. She hadn't performed for anyone important in decades, but something inside her wanted to say yes. Slowly she nodded. That evening, after everyone had left, she met him in the concert hall. He sat quietly in the front row while she approached the piano. Her hands shook again as she touched the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. The sound that filled the hall was soft and tender at first, then grew deeper, richer. Every note carried a piece of her soul, her memories of home, her husband's laughter, her younger days filled with dreams and applause. She didn't look up once. She just played, lost in her own world. When she finished, Mr. Harold had tears in his eyes. He stood slowly and clapped his hands softly. That, he said, was not just music. That was life. Maria lowered her eyes, whispering, "It's just what my heart remembers." He walked closer and said, "I want you to know something. You have given me more in 5 minutes than most students give in 5 years." You have something they can't be taught and real feeling. She didn't know how to reply. She just smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, sir." That night, as she walked home, the streets felt different. She didn't feel invisible anymore. Something inside her had awakened, a piece of her that she thought was lost forever. Meanwhile, back at the conservatory, word spread again. This time it wasn't just gossip. The professor himself had confirmed it. Everyone was talking about how the cleaning lady had played better than the top students. Some were jealous, some were curious, and some were inspired. But everyone wanted to see her play again. The next day, when Maria arrived, the director of the conservatory himself was waiting near the entrance. He smiled warmly and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Alvarez. May I have a word?" Maria froze in surprise. "The director? Talking to her?" She nodded shyly. He said kindly, "I heard what you did. It's rare to find someone who can touch people's hearts through music. Would you consider performing in our small faculty recital next week?" Just one piece, her heart almost stopped. "Oh, no, sir, I can't. I'm not a performer anymore," he smiled. "Maybe not on stage. But inside you still are," she didn't answer. She just stood there, confused and overwhelmed. She had spent years hiding from her past, and now it was calling her again, louder than ever. When she went back to work that evening, the piano looked different to her. It wasn't just a reminder of what she lost. It had become a bridge to who she really was. And though she didn't know it yet, that single invitation to play just one song was about to change her entire life. The next morning, the air inside the big house was filled with quiet tension. Everyone was talking about what had happened the night before, about how the cleaning lady, Maria, had sat at the grand piano and played like a professional. Some said it was a mistake. Some said it was a miracle. Others didn't know what to believe. The owner of the house, Mr. Castillo, was still surprised. He kept thinking about the sound of that melody. It had stayed in his mind all night like a song that refused to fade. He wasn't a man who easily showed emotion, but that music had touched something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. When Maria came to work that day, she tried to act as if nothing had happened. She put on her apron, tied her hair back, and quietly began her chores. But she could feel eyes watching her from every corner. The other maids whispered softly. The cook smiled at her kindly. Even the guards at the gate greeted her with more respect than usual, but not everyone was happy. The lady of the house, Mrs. Castillo, didn't like what she had seen. She felt embarrassed. To her, Maria was just a cleaning woman, someone who should stay in the background. The idea that a servant could sit at her piano, the same piano she used for her guests, made her feel uncomfortable. When she saw Maria polishing the windows, she called her sharply. "Maria, come here." Maria stopped and turned. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Castillo folded her arms. "About yesterday, you were asked to play, yes. But remember, you are here to clean, not to perform. Don't let it happen again unless I say so. Understood?" Maria nodded gently. "Of course, ma'am. I didn't mean any harm." Mrs. Castillo looked at her for a moment, trying to read her face, but Maria's eyes were calm. There was no anger in them, just quiet strength. She turned back and continued her work. Later that afternoon, Mr. Castillo returned from the city. He saw Maria cleaning the piano carefully, her hands moving gently over the keys as if she respected the instrument. He stopped at the door. "Maria," he said softly. She turned, startled. "Oh, good afternoon, sir." "I was just cleaning," he smiled. "I know. I wanted to thank you for what you did last night. That music, it was something special." Maria looked down. "It was just an old song I used to play. Where did you learn?" he asked curiously. She hesitated, then said quietly, "My father taught me when I was young. We didn't have much, but we had an old piano. It was my favorite thing in the world." Mr. Castillo nodded slowly. "You play with feeling. Not everyone does. Would you mind playing again tonight? For my guests?" Maria froze. "For your guests?" "Yes," he said kindly. "We're having a small gathering. I think they'd love to hear you." She looked unsure. "Sir, I don't think that's right." "I'm just the cleaning lady." He smiled. "You're more than that, Maria. You have a gift. Sometimes we hide our light because we think it doesn't belong in certain places, but talent belongs everywhere." His words made her chest tighten. For a moment she thought about saying no. She didn't want to anger Mrs. Castillo again, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet respect that she hadn't seen from anyone in a long time. So she nodded slowly. "If you wish, sir." That night the house was bright again. Guests filled the living room, their laughter echoing through the high ceilings. Mr. Castillo called for Maria. She walked in nervously, dressed in her plain uniform. People turned to look at her, whispering softly. Mr. Castillo raised his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a warm smile, "this is Maria. Last night she played something that moved me deeply. Tonight I want you all to hear it too." Some guests looked surprised. A few smiled politely. Others exchanged doubtful glances. Maria sat at the piano, her heart racing. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant. But soon her hands found their rhythm. The melody grew stronger, deeper, filling the room with emotion. It was the same tune she had played the night before, but this time it felt even more alive, like the piano itself was breathing. Every note carried a piece of her story, her struggles, her dreams, her memories. She wasn't thinking about the people watching her or the whispers in the room. She was somewhere else, back in her childhood home, sitting beside her father as he smiled proudly. When the song ended, silence filled the room. Then slowly people began to clap. Not politely, but warmly, sincerely. Even those who had doubted her were now looking at her with admiration. Mr. Castillo smiled proudly. But Mrs. Castillo, sitting in the corner, forced a smile she didn't mean. Inside, she felt uneasy. After the guests left, she cornered her husband. "Why did you let her play again?" she asked sharply. He looked calm. "Because she's talented. And people loved it. She's the cleaning lady," his wife said, her voice tight. "What will people think?" he sighed. "They'll think that music can come from anyone. Maybe we should too." That night, Maria sat alone in her small room at the back of the house. Her hand still tingled from the piano keys. She looked at her old photo on the wall, her father smiling, her mother standing beside him. Tears filled her eyes. "I did it, Papa," she whispered softly. "I played again." Over the next few days, things in the house began to change. The guests kept talking about the woman with the golden touch. Some even sent notes to Mr. Castillo, asking if she would perform again. He asked her to play during special dinners and charity events. She became part of the evenings, not as a servant, but as someone who brought life into the room. But the change brought new challenges too. Some workers in the house began to treat her differently, not with anger, but with distance. They didn't know how to act around her anymore. One evening, the young gardener said quietly, "You don't belong with us now. You're becoming one of them." Maria smiled sadly. "No, I'll always be one of you. Music doesn't change who I am." But deep down, she knew things would never be the same again. The biggest surprise came when a guest at one of the dinners, an old man with kind eyes, approached her after she played. "My dear," he said softly, "I'm a teacher at the City Music Conservatory. We're holding auditions next month. I think you should come." Maria blinked in disbelief. "Me? But I don't have papers or a degree." "I just play," he smiled. "Sometimes that's enough. The world needs people who play from the heart. Promise me you'll think about it." That night she couldn't sleep. The idea seemed impossible. Her at a music conservatory. She had spent her whole life cleaning floors and washing dishes. She didn't belong in places like that. But then she remembered how everyone had listened when she played, how even the coldest faces had softened, how her music had filled the silence with warmth. Maybe it wasn't impossible. Maybe it was just waiting for her to believe in it. The next morning she went to Mr. Castillo. "Sir," she said softly, "may I ask for one day off next month?" He looked at her curiously. "Of course, Maria, may I ask why?" She hesitated, then smiled shyly. "There's an audition at the conservatory." For a moment he just stared at her, and then his face broke into a smile. "That's wonderful. You must go. Whatever you need, transport, money, anything, it's yours." Maria's eyes widened. "I can't accept that, sir." "You can," he said kindly. "And you will. You've given us more than music, Maria. You've reminded us what real beauty sounds like." She lowered her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste this chance." In the days that followed, Maria practiced every night after finishing her chores. She stayed up late playing until her fingers ached, until the melodies became part of her heartbeat. Some nights the servants gathered quietly near the door to listen. Even those who had once ignored her began to feel proud. The gardener who had doubted her once said softly, "You'll make it." "I know you will." The night before the audition, Maria couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the stars. Her heart was full of fear, hope, and gratitude. She whispered into the quiet, "If I fail, I'll still be thankful, because at least I tried." The next morning, she packed a small bag, wore her cleanest clothes, and headed toward the conservatory. She looked out of the bus window as the city passed by. Tall buildings, busy streets, people rushing everywhere. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt alive. And as the conservatory gates came into view, her hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with excitement. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and whispered to herself, "Let's see what music has planned for me now." The week passed faster than Maria expected. Each day she worked as usual, cleaning the rooms and halls, but inside her heart she felt a quiet storm. The director's invitation still echoed in her mind. He wanted her to perform at the faculty recital, something she hadn't done in years. Every time she thought about it, her stomach tightened. She told herself it was impossible. She was a cleaning lady now, not a performer. Who would want to see her on stage? But then, at night, when she lay in bed, she could almost hear the piano calling to her. The melody she had played before kept returning to her dreams. Soft, haunting, alive. The students who once ignored her had started greeting her politely. Some even stopped to talk. They asked her about music, about how she learned to play. Maria never said much. She only smiled and said, "Music was my friend when I had no one else." But deep inside she knew she was afraid. Afraid to go back to that world again, the world she had lost so long ago. On Thursday evening after her shift, she stayed behind in the empty hall. The lights were dim, the seats empty. She sat in the front row staring at the piano. Her reflection shimmered faintly on its black surface. Mr. Harold, the music professor, walked in quietly. "Still thinking about the recital?" he asked kindly. Maria sighed. "I don't know if I can do it. It's been too long." "I've forgotten how to be brave," he smiled gently. "Bravery never leaves. It only hides when life gets heavy." She looked at him with tired eyes. "What if I fail?" He shook his head. "You can't fail when you play with heart. People will hear you. Not just your music and you. That's what matters." Maria stayed silent for a moment, then said softly, "When I play, I remember everything, the good and the painful. Sometimes it's too much," he nodded. "Maybe that's why people need to hear you, because you play what they can't say." His words lingered in her mind long after he left. The next morning, the director called her again to confirm her decision. "Only one piece," he said kindly. "Nothing fancy, just something that means something to you." Maria hesitated, then finally said yes. The recital was in 2 days. She spent the next evening alone in the hall, practicing after everyone had gone. At first, her hands trembled so much she could barely play a simple tune. Her fingers felt stiff, her rhythm unsure. But after a while, the old feeling began to return. The warmth, the flow, the connection between her heart and the keys. As she played, tears filled her eyes. The memories came back. The concerts, the applause, her husband sitting in the front row smiling proudly. He used to tell her that when she played, the world stopped for a moment. She missed that. She missed him. When she finished, the sound of her last note echoed gently in the empty hall. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "If you're watching me, I'll try one more time." The night of the recital arrived. The conservatory was decorated beautifully. The students, teachers, and even some city guests were seated, chatting quietly as the program began. No one expected much from the cleaning lady who was now performing. Some came just out of curiosity, others out of respect. Backstage, Maria stood in her simple beige dress, hands pressed together. It wasn't new or fancy, but it was clean and modest, and the best she had. One of the students who had once mocked her came to wish her luck. "You'll do great," he said sincerely. She smiled nervously. "Thank you." When her name was announced, the hall went silent. She walked slowly to the stage. her shoes making soft sounds on the wooden floor. She bowed politely, then sat down at the piano. Her heart pounded in her chest. For a moment, she thought she might not be able to start. Then she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her fingers touched the keys. The first note came out soft, trembling, like a whisper. But then the melody grew stronger, smoother, alive. She wasn't just playing, she was remembering. Every note carried a memory. Her childhood lessons, her husband's laughter, the long years of silence. The audience listened in complete stillness. Some closed their eyes. Some wiped their tears. The music seemed to speak directly to their hearts. It wasn't perfect. A few notes slipped. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the emotion, the truth behind every sound. When she reached the final note, the silence that followed felt almost holy. And then slowly the hall filled with applause, soft at first, then louder, rising until it filled every corner of the room. People stood up. They clapped, cheered, and some even cried. Maria sat there frozen. She hadn't felt that sound and applause in so many years. It was overwhelming. Her eyes filled with tears as she stood and bowed deeply. In the front row, the director was smiling proudly. Mr. Harold clapped until his hands turned red. The students who once laughed at her were now standing, cheering the loudest. When she left the stage, her legs felt weak. Backstage, the director met her with a warm smile. "You were wonderful," he said. "You reminded everyone here what real music feels like." Maria wiped her tears, whispering, "Thank you for giving me a chance." "It's not just a chance," he replied. "It's a beginning." The recital ended, but the echo of her performance stayed in everyone's hearts. Over the next few days, people kept talking about it. Some said they hadn't felt that kind of emotion in years. Others said it changed how they thought about music, that it wasn't about fame or trophies, but about truth. Students started practicing with more heart. Even the strict professors seemed softer, more thoughtful. Something had shifted in the conservatory. A week later, the director called Maria into his office again. She walked in shyly, unsure what to expect. He smiled. "Maria, we've been discussing something. We'd like to offer you a new role here, as a piano instructor for emotional expression and interpretation." Maria's eyes widened. "Me teach?" He nodded. "Yes, you have something no textbook can give: experience, feeling, honesty. That's what these young musicians need." She covered her mouth with her hand, tears filling her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said kindly. She laughed softly, her heart full. "Then yes." That day she walked out of the office not as a cleaning lady, but as a teacher. She still kept her uniform folded neatly in her locker, not out of shame, but as a reminder of how far she had come. On her first day as an instructor, some students were nervous, not sure what to expect. But when she sat at the piano and began to play, the same magic filled the room. She told them, "Don't play to impress. Play to express. Music is not about showing off. It's about speaking with your soul." The students listened closely. Some of them began crying without knowing why. For the first time, they understood what their instruments were truly for. Every afternoon after class, Maria still cleaned a little. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It reminded her of the woman who once stood alone with a mop, afraid to touch the piano again. Now she played every day. Her music filled the conservatory halls, soft and warm. Students stopped to listen whenever she practiced. One evening, as she walked past the concert hall, she saw a group of students laughing and talking. One of them called out, "Good night, ma'am." She smiled and waved. When she entered the empty hall, she sat at the piano again. She touched the keys gently and whispered, "Thank you, life, for giving me another chance." The sound of her music floated through the air, calm, deep, and full of gratitude. The same hands that once held a mop now told stories of hope and strength. And somewhere, deep inside her heart, she knew that her husband would have been proud. The pain had turned into peace and the silence into music. Maria wasn't just the cleaning lady anymore. She was the heart of the conservatory. The reminder that no matter how far life takes you away from your dreams, one sound, one chance, one brave step can bring it all back again. The days slowly turned into weeks and weeks into months. The music conservatory had changed in ways no one expected. The students practiced not just with their fingers, but with their hearts. The teachers became gentler, more patient. Even the hallways felt different, lighter, warmer, filled with a sense of peace. And at the center of it all was Maria. Every morning, she walked through the same doors she once entered as a cleaner. But now she carried a folder of sheet music in her hands instead of a mop. Her step was steady, her face calm. Students greeted her with respect and affection. Some even waited for her at the door, eager for her next lesson. She still preferred to dress simply, wearing plain clothes and a soft smile. She didn't care about fancy things. She only cared about the music, and the people who wanted to feel it the way she did. Her small piano class became the most loved in the conservatory. Students said there was something special about the way she taught. She didn't shout or scold. She spoke softly, explaining things in ways that touched the heart. Don't chase the perfect note, she would say. Chase the feeling behind it. That's where the real music lives. One afternoon, a young student named Raphael sat at the piano, frustrated after playing the same piece again and again. His fingers were fast, but his face showed no emotion. Maria stood behind him and said gently, "Close your eyes." He frowned. "Why?" "Because music doesn't come from your hands. It comes from your heart. Close your eyes, think of someone or something you love, and then play." He hesitated, then did as she said. The next time he played, the sound changed completely. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. When he finished, Maria smiled. "Now that," she said softly, "is real music." Raphael looked up, his eyes shining. "I think I understand now," Maria nodded. "Good, remember that feeling. That's what will guide you." News of her teaching spread outside the conservatory. People from other schools came to watch her classes. Some local newspapers wrote small articles about the cleaning lady who became a teacher. Her story touched hearts far beyond the school walls, but Maria never saw herself as special. Whenever someone praised her, she would say, "I just share what life taught me." One morning, the director called her into his office again. "Maria," he said warmly, "we've received many requests from people who want to learn from you, not just students, but adults too. We're thinking of starting a special weekend workshop in your name. What do you think?" She smiled softly. "If it helps someone find peace in music, I'd be happy to do it." That weekend, her first workshop began. The hall was full, not just with students, but with parents, retired people, and even some who had never touched an instrument before. Maria welcomed everyone with the same kindness. She began by saying, "Music doesn't belong to professionals. It belongs to anyone who has a heart. You don't need fame or money to make music. You just need honesty." Then she sat down and played a slow, emotional melody that filled the room. Some people closed their eyes. Some quietly cried. When she stopped, the hall was silent, as if no one wanted to break the moment. That day, many people said her class healed something inside them. Maria walked home that evening with a calm heart. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. She looked up and whispered, "Thank you." She still lived in the same small apartment. She never wanted anything bigger. On her wall hung an old photograph of her and her husband, taken years ago when they were young and full of dreams. Every night before sleeping, she looked at the photo and smiled. "We did it," she would whisper. "Your words were right. Music never leaves." Months later, the conservatory decided to hold a special event, the Heart of Music concert, dedicated to Maria. They wanted her to perform again, but this time, not alone. They asked her to play with the students she had taught. At first, she refused. "It's their moment," she said, but the director insisted gently, "They want to share it with you. You're part of their music now." She finally agreed. The concert day arrived. The hall was full again and even more crowded than before. People from the city came, teachers, families, and many who had once been touched by her story. Backstage, Maria stood with her students, helping them calm their nerves. "Don't think about the crowd," she said. "Think about the music. Play it with love. That's all you need to do." When they walked onto the stage, the audience clapped warmly. Maria sat at the piano in the center, surrounded by her students playing violins, flutes, and cellos. She gave them a gentle nod and the music began. It started softly with the students leading. Then slowly, Maria joined in, her fingers dancing across the keys like flowing water. The melody rose full of warmth and hope. It was a song about new beginnings, about finding light after darkness. As she played, Maria looked at her students and smiled. She could see how much they had grown, not just as musicians, but as people. Their faces were full of emotion, their music sincere. When the final note ended, the hall stood in silence for a few seconds, and then erupted into applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some shouted her name. Maria bowed deeply, her eyes full of tears. Her students hugged her one by one. It was more than just a performance. It was a celebration of everything she had lived for. After the concert, the director announced something special. From today onward, he said, our scholarship for underprivileged music students will be named the Alvarez Scholarship, in honor of Maria, who showed us that true talent comes from the soul. The audience clapped again, louder than before. Maria covered her mouth, overwhelmed. She had never imagined that her name would one day stand for hope. When the event ended, Maria walked alone back into the empty hall. The lights were dim, the seats empty again, just like they used to be when she cleaned them every night. She walked to the piano and placed her hand gently on it. So much has changed, she whispered. But maybe it was always meant to happen this way. She sat down and played one last piece, slow, peaceful, full of gratitude. The sound floated softly through the air, echoing against the walls. In that moment, she didn't feel like a cleaner, a teacher, or a performer. She just felt human, someone who had lived, lost, and found herself again through the thing she loved most. The night outside was quiet. The stars shone brightly through the glass windows. As the final note faded, she closed the piano lid gently, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you, old friend." The next morning, the students found her sitting near the piano, resting peacefully with a soft smile on her face. The piano lid was closed and a single sheet of music lay beside her, the same melody she had played the first time she touched the piano in front of them. No one cried loudly that day. Instead, they honored her in the best way they knew, through music. The conservatory held a tribute concert where every student played her melody. The sound filled the air with love, peace, and memory. From that day on, her story became a legend at the conservatory. New students heard it every year, about the cleaning lady who once played a single note that changed everything. And even though she was gone, her presence lived in every corner of the building, in the quiet echo of the piano, in the way students spoke softly about music, in the respect they showed to every person who worked there. Her photo hung near the concert hall entrance, with a small plaque beneath it that read, "She taught us that greatness has no uniform, only heart." Every evening, when the hall lights dimmed and the world outside grew silent, some said they could still hear faint music coming from the piano, gentle, calm, and full of love. It was as if the spirit of Maria still played there, reminding everyone that one person's courage and kindness can turn even the smallest sound into something eternal. And so, the woman who once swept the floors became the soul of the conservatory, proof that no dream is ever truly lost, and that sometimes the most beautiful melodies come from the quietest hearts.